First Lieutenant Robert Keane and 9 other men took off for some of the world's most dangerous flying weather. They never landed.
There's a silence above Greenland that you can feel, even when you're thousands of feet away. A silence older than memory, older than war. On July 15, 1942, that silence was broken. Not by thunder, not by wind, but by the desperate engines of 6 American P-38 Lightnings and 2 B-17 Flying Fortresses fighting for their lives in the white void. First Lieutenant Robert Keane and his crew, men barely older than college kids, took off that day for what would become one of history's most extraordinary journeys into oblivion. They flew Operation Bolero, a mission born of desperation, ambition, and the burning chaos of global conflict. Picture it, World War II at full tilt. The world splintering along the Atlantic, the United States Army Air Force pushing hundreds of planes across the deadliest air corridor on Earth. The snowball run, they called it, as if you could trivialize the risk. Nearly 700 aircraft, heavy bombers, sleek new fighters, cargo haulers, all funneled from Maine, up through the icy fist of Greenland and Iceland, hoping to reach the war-torn heart of Europe. The weather didn't care. The sky didn't play favorites, and every pilot knew, deep down, that the only difference between a hero and a ghost was luck. Luck and the tiniest, cruelest margin for error. On that July morning, the odds finally ran out. The squadron hit the most unforgiving storm any of them had seen. A whiteout so dense it erased the horizon, turned the cockpit glass into a solid sheet of ice. They lost visibility, lost hope. When the news came, refueling stop at Iceland closed, home base at Greenland swallowed by the same storm, the calculus became brutally simple. Fly on into nothingness, or try to land on an endless sheet of death. The fuel gauges ticked toward empty. Lieutenant Brad McManus, knowing he had no choice, took the first leap, banked his P-38 for a patch of ice that looked flatter than the rest. He hit the ground. For one dizzying second, it seemed he'd pulled it off, until his nose wheel snapped. The plane flipped, snow exploded through the glass, and everything went silent. McManus crawled out alive, shaken, half blind from the white glare, but breathing. The others learned quickly, belly landing their planes, sliding them across the frozen waste, desperate to avoid the same fate. One by one, the squadron fell from the sky. Not in fire, not in glory, but in silence. The B-17s circled above, stalling for time, sending out SOS flares that vanished into the snow, praying for a miracle. Eventually, they too ran out of sky, out of luck. By some grace, all 25 men survived the landings. In the shadow of twisted metal, battered wings, and fractured hopes, they pulled together inside the bombers, huddling for warmth against the merciless cold. Imagine the stillness, only the howl of the wind and the muted sound of breathing. No battle, no glory, just survival. A handful of men, stripped down to their most basic instincts. For 9 days, they rationed hope. When supplies finally dropped from the sky, food, blankets, the thinnest lifeline, they clung to the taste of rescue. On July 24th, salvation arrived in the form of dog sleds, the cavalry from another century carving across the ice. The men marched 10 miles through agony and exhaustion to the coast, where a U.S. Coast Guard ship waited. They left their planes behind, relics sinking into the white, abandoned but never forgotten. Years later, McManus tried to explain what it felt like to walk away. Every pilot's bond with his plane was sacred, a product of late nights, close calls, the promise that this machine would bring you home or die trying. Leaving meant abandoning a friend, a piece of yourself. Bittersweet doesn't begin to cover it. But the living go home, and the machines, they sleep, they wait, slowly vanishing beneath a relentless tide of snow and time. The Arctic never gives back what it takes. In the months and years that followed the rescue, the world spun on. Battles raged elsewhere. The names of those planes and their crews faded into military records, the kind filed away and rarely spoken aloud. But out on that glacier, nature was not content to let history rest on the surface. Snow after snow, storm after storm. The white built up, weight pressing down, year by year, decade after decade. Each new winter layered the fallen squadron with another silencing sheet. What was once visible to the naked eye, shattered canopies, bulletproof glass clouded by frost, the outlines of propellers, slowly disappeared, Nothing dramatic, no collapse, just a steady, relentless entombment. No one thought much of the planes at first. For the United States, the loss was recorded, explained. Mechanical misfortune, weather, acts of God. They were casualties, nothing more, among the countless sacrifices of war. But glaciers have a way of transforming everything left on their backs. As the seasons turned, what had landed on the surface was slowly dragged down. Not because the metal was heavy, not because the ice melted and refroze, but because of the unstoppable, slow-motion machinery of nature itself. Snow became fern, fern became ice, layers crushed together so tightly that time itself began to warp. The squadron was no longer simply covered, it was absorbed, carried, moved in silence and darkness. Decades later, as the world entered a new era of technology and obsession with the past, whispers started. Rumors of the lost squadron haunted aviation circles, fueled by the rare, grainy black and white photos of the crew standing beside their grounded machines, by stories passed from one airman to another over beers and at funerals. How could so many planes just vanish? Hadn't anyone tried to recover them? Was it possible, just possible, that somewhere, entombed in ice, they were still there, frozen in time, waiting? By the 1980s, the myth was too strong to ignore. Search teams, part adventurer, part scientist, part treasure hunter, launched expeditions to the southeast ice fields of Greenland. Most believed the planes would be easy to find. How deep could snow possibly be? A few feet, maybe 10 at most, some guessed. They brought ground-penetrating radar, long steel rods, optimism. The first sweeps yielded only silence. The glacier was not just hiding the planes, it was swallowing the searchers' hope. Towering markers, metal poles driven deep to serve as reference points, vanished within weeks. A 20-foot steel tower set up over a suspected bomber location began to disappear, sinking several inches into the snow after only 9 days. The following year, a wooden pole, once 6 feet tall, now barely poked above the surface. Greenland's ice sheet was not just a place, but a process, alive, unpredictable, dangerous. In 1988, a miracle. A radar signal finally bounced back from something dense and metallic, one of the bombers resting over 250 feet below the surface. The searchers were stunned. That much ice, that much burial, in just 46 years, it was unthinkable. By 2018, when a new team picked up the trail and tracked another P-38, what would be named Echo, they found it even deeper, over 300 feet down. Theories flourished. Had the plane somehow sunk into the glacier, sliding through meltwater? Was there some unknown mechanism drawing metal to the Earth's core? But the evidence said otherwise. The planes were still flat, aligned as they'd landed. There was no sign of tilting or collapse. Layer by layer, snowfall alone had done the job. Greenland's Peter Alley, the legendary stretch where the planes landed, was notorious among pilots for blizzards that could drop meters of snow in a single storm, changing the landscape forever in a single night. If the glacier was moving, it was moving the planes too. In the years since their landing, satellite and GPS data proved that the entire lost squadron had shifted several miles downhill, riding the ice like cargo on a ghost ship. What's buried in the Arctic never stays still. Even the oldest, thickest, most stable sheets of ice are, in truth, rivers that flow. Not in hours or days, but in lifetimes. But these discoveries did more than rewrite the map. They upended the very models of how scientists understood glacial history. The textbooks said the bottom layers of Greenland's ice must be ancient, hundreds of thousands of years old. Yet here were World War II relics, buried far deeper than expected in just half a century. If the ice could accumulate so quickly, what else did we get wrong about Earth's memory? The search for the lost planes had become a search for the limits of knowledge itself.
We're hit, losing altitude
Question,
fast.
a challenge, an unsolved riddle hiding beneath 3 centuries' worth of winter. Greenland's ice doesn't give up secrets easily. For every adventurer drawn by the legend of the lost squadron, the glacier had new ways to remind them who was in charge. The cold was just the first enemy, a constant, all-consuming chill that stung the lungs and numbed the mind, robbing even the bravest of clear thought. But worse was the silence, that deep, merciless hush of the polar wastes, broken only by the distant moan of shifting ice and the muffled crunch of boots on hard-packed snow. It was in this unending stillness that the searchers, scientists, engineers, pilots, and dreamers waged their battle. Not against a living enemy, but against the slow, endless work of time itself. Their tools grew more sophisticated every year. At first, they dragged crude radar sleds behind snowmobiles, chasing shadows and static. But with every failed mission, the obsession grew. They returned with better equipment, ground-penetrating radar that could scan to depths of hundreds of feet, GPS trackers, custom-built steel augers. Still, the glacier mocked their efforts, swallowing their flags and markers, erasing every trace as quickly as they laid it down. There were days, long, endless days, when even the hardiest among them considered surrender. How could anyone track what the Earth itself was determined to hide? But then came the new age, the age of drones, satellites, and data analytics. The team led by Jim Salazar, a man whose life had become inseparable from the chase, brought with them the latest weapon, a massive aerial drone, its belly fitted with a cutting-edge ground-penetrating radar array. In just minutes, it covered ground that once took teams days to sweep on foot. The first pass revealed anomalies, something dense, something metallic, deep below the ancient snow. Salazar and his crew crowded around the monitors, eyes wide, hope and skepticism warring on their faces. Had they found a plane? Or was it nothing but a boulder, a trick of the ice, the shadow of a long-gone glacier flow? Even in victory, the ice whispered doubt. But evidence breeds obsession. Unwilling to trust the radar alone, the team devised a new plan, a feat of engineering as stubborn as it was brilliant. They built a thermal probe, a kind of hot lance powered by a pressure washer system meant to melt straight through over 300 feet of layered snow and ancient ice. It was a gamble. Every step, setting up the scaffolding, calibrating the nozzle, triple-checking the angles, was another chance for disaster. Yet, as the machine began its slow descent, steam rising into the Arctic night, no one spoke. They just watched the cable spool out, foot after foot, minute after nerve-wracking minute, hearts pounding as centuries of cold yielded inch by inch. When the probe finally re-emerged, it was coated not in dirt or dust, but in something the team could hardly process, bright, almost shockingly red fluid, gleaming wet against the frost. Silence gave way to confusion, then disbelief, then wild, ragged cheers. Hydraulic fluid, Aeroshell 5606, the same kind used in the P-38's landing gear and brake systems. Untouched, still liquid after 76 years entombed in permafrost. It splashed onto gloves and jackets, cooled at their feet, the sharp chemical tang somehow fresh in the glacial air. Salazar himself, a man not given to outbursts, simply shook his head, speechless. "We weren't expecting that," he would later say. "We pulled the probe back up and, lo and behold, it had all that hydraulic fluid all over it." For a moment, time collapsed. 1942, and today fused in a single drop of red, a moment so impossible that even the ice seemed to pause in respect. But discovery is never the end. The fluid proved the impossible. Somewhere down there was not just metal, not just memory, but a piece of history, preserved as if by miracle. The team worked with painstaking precision, feeding the probe down again and again, mapping every anomaly, building a picture layer by layer. GPS, seismic readings, hours of review, all pointed to one conclusion. They had found a plane. Not just any plane, P-38 Echo, the very fighter flown by Lieutenant Colonel Robert Wilson. Lost to the world for nearly 8 decades. The world changed overnight. News traveled fast, bouncing from scientific journals to aviation forums to the front pages of global media. How could this be? What else might the ice have preserved? Was it possible, after all these years, that more than hydraulic fluid waited beneath the surface? Engines, control panels, even the pilot's personal gear, sealed in the time capsule crafted by nature herself. And the questions kept coming. Could the other planes be found? Could they one day be lifted out, restored, flown again? For the first time, hope felt rational. But hope is a double-edged sword. Greenland's ice was still dangerous, full of hidden crevasses and sudden storms, its beauty masking a deadly unpredictability. The search had only begun. Still, for Salazar's team, and for every dreamer who ever chased ghosts across the Arctic, this was proof. Sometimes, against every odd, history answers back. There is a moment in every quest where anticipation turns to awe, and awe turns to something like reverence. That's what it felt like when, after months of calculations and days of breathless drilling, the team realized they had not only found a World War II fighter, but had disturbed a time capsule no human hands had touched in nearly 80 years. It was as if the ice itself had signed a pact with history, keeping secrets only until the right moment, then giving them up in a flood of revelation. When the team identified the plane as P-38 Echo, confirmation rippled through the camp, a tidal wave of adrenaline, relief, and above all, humility. All those years, all that relentless Arctic pressure. Yet here it was, right where Wilson and his comrades had left it, though now buried deep in the planet's frozen heart. The preservation was uncanny. The hydraulic fluid had stayed liquid, shielded from sunlight and oxidation by layers upon layers of ancient snow. That simple, impossible fact changed everything. If one element survived, what else might remain untouched? Could the cockpit's dials still be legible? Might the engine, though inert, bear fingerprints of maintenance long ago? Was there, hidden somewhere within, a personal memento, a patch, a photograph, a dog tag, waiting for light again? The possibilities ignited imaginations around the world. Aviation historians dreamed of full restorations, of the day when Echo might once again take to the air, her frame painstakingly rebuilt, from pieces that, against all logic, had cheated time. For the descendants of Wilson, Keane, McManus, and the other men, the find was personal. A bridge spanning generations, connecting grandfathers and great-uncles lost to legend with the present, binding wounds that history had left raw for decades. But as with every revelation, new questions followed fast. How had the glacier kept so much so perfectly? What was it about this environment, so brutal and inhospitable, that had made it a guardian rather than a destroyer? Scientists, climatologists, and engineers pored over the data. They realized that the incredible rate of snow accumulation, once considered a quirk of the region, was actually a window into the Earth's own secret rhythms. If snow could pile hundreds of feet deep in 50 years, how many other assumptions about ice ages, climate models, the very timelines of our planet were up for revision? The field crew worked with surgical care, mapping every inch of the site, logging every reading. They used ground-penetrating radar to create ghostly cross-sections of the P-38, studying the contours of its wings, the sweep of its tail. Every anomaly on the screen was a question. Was that the tip of a propeller, or just a slab of compressed snow? Was that strange dark patch a collapsed bulkhead, or a survivor, a piece of the past, still resisting? Each discovery was met with equal parts celebration and caution, for the ice remained a treacherous partner. Every hour brought new dangers, shifting cracks, the threat of hidden crevasses, storms that could erase the day's work in minutes. Still, the mission pressed forward. Once the hydraulic fluid proved the identity, Salazar's team began dreaming of what they might uncover next. What stories would be written in the rust and aluminum, the paint and canvas, the frozen grease? Could a photo, wedged under a seat, reveal the face of a pilot smiling before takeoff? Might a name scratched in a panel tell a story never recorded in any archive? Could the echoes of war, heartbreak, and hope still linger, waiting for the world to listen? And even as the technical team mapped and drilled, others turned their thoughts to the future. Could the technology pioneered here, drones, radar, heat probes, open the doors to more recoveries, not only in Greenland, but in jungles, deserts, oceans around the world? Could lost squadrons, lost crews, lost names be found and finally brought home? The hunt was no longer just for airplanes, it was for closure, for dignity, for the kind of truth that makes nations and families whole again. But with hope comes responsibility. As the world learned what Salazar's team had found, debates raged. Should the plane be lifted and restored, or left entombed as a memorial? Should more teams risk the dangers of the glacier to bring up the rest of the squadron? Or would that quest risk lives for the sake of curiosity, or worse, spectacle? In every bar and every online forum where history buffs gathered, the arguments flared. Some saw the ice as a grave that should never be disturbed. Others saw it as a vault of secrets waiting for their moment in the sun. No matter the outcome, one thing was clear. The find had changed everything. The past was not gone, only waiting. The The sky that had swallowed the squadron had, in the end, become their shelter, not their tomb. Beneath every rivet, every frozen drop of oil, every length of bent aluminum locked inside the glacier, there is a human story. Stories more complicated, more fragile, and more enduring than any machine. The hunt for the lost squadron was always about more than hardware. For the men who flew these planes, the separation from their aircraft wasn't just about leaving behind a tool of war. It was about leaving a piece of themselves, a connection forged in fire, fear, and impossible beauty at 30,000 feet. McManus said it best: there's a bonding that occurs between a young pilot and his own plane. That's not just nostalgia, that's survival, that's love. In the aftermath of the discovery, families who had lived for generations with only uncertainty finally had a name, a photograph, a location. For some, it was closure. For others, it was a reopening of wounds thought long healed. Historians and enthusiasts flocked to the story, hungry for artifacts and meaning, for any evidence that the past could still reach out, shake our certainties, force us to feel. Newspapers and documentaries chronicled every stage of the excavation, every droplet of hydraulic fluid, every half-erased serial number. The world watched, transfixed, as the ice gave up its dead. But for every moment of triumph, there were shadows. The glacier is not a passive participant. It is a living, shifting threat. Teams faced not just the cold, but the risk of sudden collapse, of vanishing into hidden crevasses, of storms that could turn an ordinary day into a disaster. There were nights when tents were nearly flattened by wind, mornings when tracks vanished overnight, afternoons spent repairing machinery by hand, numb fingers bleeding through the work gloves. Every day on the ice was a reminder: nature cannot be commanded, only respected. And then there is the science, the unending avalanche of questions set off by the discovery. The entire world of glaciology was forced to reckon with the implications of the squadron's burial. Models built on slow, predictable accumulation now had to account for wild, violent surges of snow. How much of what we think we know about climate history, about the dating of ancient ice, is just an artifact of local chaos, of rare events that rewrite the rules? Was it possible that other impossible time capsules are locked beneath our feet, waiting for a lucky team and a brave enough question? Material scientists marveled at the hydraulic fluid, at metal that resisted corrosion, at paint and rubber and cloth that should have rotted, but had instead been kept pristine by the cold's harsh mercy. If we could recover technology from 70 or 80 years ago, what about 1,000? 10,000? The boundaries of discovery seem to push outward like the glacier itself. But perhaps the deepest lesson comes not from machines or models, but from the way this story binds the living to the lost. The search for the lost squadron is only a fragment of a much larger quest, the effort to account for the more than 80,000 Americans still missing from past conflicts. Most will never be found. Their stories, scattered across jungles, mountains, oceans, deserts, remain only in memory, in a photograph on a mantelpiece, in the aching silence at the end of a family line. Organizations like Project Recover and the DPAA labor on, mapping, searching, writing letters, bringing news both welcome and devastating. For them, every plane, every set of remains, every dog tag returned is not just a statistic. It is a homecoming,
Mayday.
A promise kept,
Mayday, this is
a
Eagle
question
1.
mark finally
We're
becoming
hit,
a period.
losing altitude fast.
Why do people spend their lives, risk their safety, to find the lost? The answer is as old as grief, as basic as hope. Psychologists call it ambiguous loss, that unending tension between hope and mourning, between not knowing and never being able to let go. The plane in the ice is more than metal. It is the echo of a voice, the unfinished story of a life cut short, the one clue that can transform a wound from open to healed. The men and women who search are not just archaeologists. They are witnesses. They are caretakers of memory, of dignity, of the ties that bind past to present. The legacy of the lost squadron ripples outward, into science, into family, into national myth. For every historian thrilled by a rare preservation, there is a daughter or grandson quietly holding a piece of closure. For every scientist updating a model, there is a dreamer, a child staring at the sky, wondering what else might sleep beneath the surface. The debate will rage on. Should we raise the planes or let them rest? Should the ice remain a memorial or become a resource for the future? There are no simple answers, only the certainty that every act of discovery comes with a cost, and every cost must be weighed against what is gained. What do we learn, finally, from the glacier's gift? That history is never truly lost, only waiting, that the Earth remembers, even when we forget. That somewhere deep beneath the silence, the engines of courage, hope, and curiosity are still humming, still calling us to dig deeper, to ask better questions, to bring the past home. And so the story comes full circle.
I'm going down.
The sky that once seemed endless, hostile, and empty is revealed as a vault, a guardian, a keeper of secrets. The ice that threatened to erase memory became, in the end, its greatest defender. The men who fell from the sky that day in 1942 are gone, but not lost. Their machines sleep, but their story is awake, alive in every heart that dares to remember, to seek, to uncover what lies beneath. If you made it this far, remember, the next time you hear silence or see a blank white field stretching to the horizon, know that beneath your feet, somewhere, history is waiting. And all it takes is one question, one act of courage, one moment of wonder to bring it roaring back to life. If this journey through the ice, across time, has moved you, if the courage of those lost and those searching has sparked something inside you, don't let it end here. Like, comment, subscribe, share your thoughts, ask your questions. Because history is written not just by those who live it, but by those who refuse to let it be forgotten. To explore more mysteries, click the next video. The story isn't over, it's just waiting, just beneath the surface.